All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and we've got a very exciting show to share with you today. We're talking about mum and dad property investors and small business owners, and we plead a case, Ben, that they are one and the same. What else do we cover?
Well, Bryce, in what's making property news at the end of the show, there are some green shoots happening in the new build space. So I've got a bit of data to share with everyone on that. So hang around to the end of the show for that.
Stick around for that, folks. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and welcome back to you. Hello, Ben. How are you?
Oh, mate, I'm feeling a little flat, to be honest, Bryce.
Oh, this is a stitch up.
No, it's not. It's just, obviously, we've got no more footy to look forward to.
Mate, most of our audience has gone, thank God they both finished out of the finals.
Do you think I jinxed Freo by just saying,
Yeah, you did. Yep.
I so wanted you to get in there and cause some damage.
We don't want your support. But no, it's we've now got to choose our secondary teams, Ben. So I'm obviously Geelong with the boys. What are you for secondary?
That's a good question. I'll go the Doggies.
All right, Doggies. Nice.
Doggies.
Very good. So there you
Let
go,
them
folks.
get their third premiership, try again. And then obviously good luck to GWS to try and get there first.
Yeah.
But yes, no, the Doggies will be mine.
When you're a Freo supporter, you don't want anyone else to get there first. You don't want Suns to, you don't want GWS to get it. You don't want Security to break the drought. You just want to get your own. So you just become
and good luck to the WAFL teams who start their campaigns this week. Again. So I've at least got the Pies to look forward to on that side of the fence. So looking forward to watching the girls go around.
Well said. There you go. Well done to all those participating. But Ben, I want to quickly just labour here. We've got a really great show today.
Yes.
I think it's really important narrative change that we want to talk about. But before we get there, I just want to labour on something we did last week. Right? We did a webinar to an audience. It was a really significant turnout where people came to watch us unfold two new features in MOORR, which is MOORR band. And I just really want to say to anyone who's listening to this, if you're a property investor, I think you should check it out. So the links we'll make the link super easy in the description here, but just check it out, because what was interesting is we started this poll at the beginning, Ben, and we said to folks, how are you currently managing your investment property portfolio? And the overwhelming majority was through spreadsheets, Ben, largely Microsoft Excel, but there's some variations around that. But what I really loved about the end was some of the people who had changed their experience just through the 60 minutes of hanging out with us, where they go, I think I'm going to put the spreadsheets aside. So I just want to send out an invitation to our audience. If you are a property investor, check it out. It's actually a game changer. It actually gives you the ability to go in on a global level and combine two things that we're passionate about. One is money smarts, and two is how you manage your property. So if you want to be a property investor that's data driven, Ben, not sort of here's the shoebox at the end of the year. How did I go? What was the benefit I received? If you want to actually know what's going on as you go through the year in a very simple and straightforward way, I just really want to encourage people to check it out. It is a game changer. There was a little lull in the updates that we gave as a team here, that there was just a ton of stuff that you and the team, Ben, had to sort out with tech debt, right? Which meant that there was just a lot of stuff grinding where we couldn't come on here and talk to people about the updates. But now that that's the thing of the past, these two things have been significant updates. So it's a call to arms to our long-term property investors who've maybe thought, Money Smarts is something good that I could think about. Oh, I haven't logged on for a little while. Go and check it out. Seriously, go and check it out. It changes the way that you're going to manage your portfolio going forward.
And Bryce, look, to our beautiful community in the Property Couch, we'll be launching Money Smarts 2.0 in October. So we've done a huge revamp of that. And then we've obviously got transactional and open banking that we're starting to do that work to basically integrate CDR, which is consumer data right, into our platform. Now, off the back of that, I've got a little call to action for anyone who wants to come across and be part of the MOORR team and sort of build out this platform that we're trying to build out. We've got a new opening for a security operations manager. And so we're talking about, tech being knee deep into cybersecurity, into governance, compliance, risk work. And so you'll be working under the Chief Technology Officer in terms of building out all of those components to ensure that we continue to keep the security and the safety of the platform at its absolute optimum. And then obviously, as more and more people, we've had over 53,000 people register to use the platform now. So, we're all in on this vision of creating the number one platform to manage and run your property investment portfolio. So yeah, if you haven't already checked it out, watch the webinar, see if there's things on there that you like, and just be mindful that we're building more and more components. We've got a full-time dev team of around 9 developers who are constantly in a great product team, ably led by James and also Jade and Ulrich. And so ultimately through that work, we are just building the stuff that our people want, and that is to effectively run and manage their property investment portfolio. So it's definitely an exciting time for what we're doing at MOORR.
We're getting a bit of a head of steam up. So Ben, what I just heard, so if someone is listening to this and they know someone who has a combined love of love property investing, and they know how to do all that sort of cybersecurity techie stuff that is essentially the gatekeeper between the security of the information and the outside world. So if you are that person, or someone who would be that person, just
check the link in the show description. We'll put a link in there, and that'll take you to the advertisement for that role, which will probably sit under the Empower Wealth website for now. But that's basically for our group, the group of the advisory business, and also TPC and also MOORR. That's our sort of integrated group of companies that we're working with. So check that out.
Check it out, folks. Check out, if you know someone, please send them a note. Ask them to put their hand up, because that combination of loving property and loving tech, that would be nirvana. It doesn't have to be the case, Ben. You'd probably, if you love tech and you just got a cursory interest in property, that's fine. But if you've got the dual passion, that'd be amazing. But so go and check it out, folks. You can get rid of those spreadsheets forever and start getting some insights, which are only going to get better and better and better. Hey, Ben, as you know, with Mindset Minute theme, it's always just trying to set people up for a thought through the week. And I've kind of trying to be on a mission to find the message that someone else is delivering that kind of matches, instead of just you and me saying blah, 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 take action, all that sort of stuff. So I found this one. So let's have a little listen now.
One characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality.
Hey, Ben, what I really loved about that is it just supports our message, right? And working really hard to make your future a reality. So it requires passion, perseverance, long-term goals, stamina, and sticking with your future. It doesn't say get it done in 5 minutes. And the other part was it didn't have anything to do with your social intelligence, if you're good looking, your physical health, which obviously is a bonus if you've got good physical health, and it wasn't your IQ. Yeah. It was just grit. And I love that. Day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years. How much does that resonate with our message, Ben? It's buy an investment property, be able to withstand some of the negativity. If you're a Victorian property investor right now, what is required of you is some grit. You need the grit day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, for years, because the bigger picture in Victoria and the population base is a really rock solid one. But right now you're obviously getting some negative press around that. But I just love the way that it supports the message here on the Property Couch, Ben, which was why I thought it was a poignant one for us to share.
Yeah, it's a classic when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and that's that grit piece. It's like being determined to, in some way, change the world for you. You don't have to change the entire world. There are people who are trying to do that, but in your little world, in your little ecosystem, how you want to provide security for your family, how you want to go about your life and live the best version of yourself, your way, lifestyle by design. It does require a bit of grit because it's not always smooth sailing. And I think that's a nice little reminder in terms of, how you have to go about that.
There you go, folks. Let's get gritty, and you can achieve, you make your future a reality. I like that piece. Hey, Ben, today our central theme is property investing 2.0, why property investors must think like small business owners. Now, Ben, we've touched on this a bit over the past, but as a standalone episode for someone who might be hearing this for the first time, we really want to frame up the discussion around why property investors should see themselves as small business owners. And we're gonna plead a case as to why it's actually essential that not only do you see yourself as a small business owner, but the messaging that you deliver in any conversations you're having, and particularly at a national level in some of the advocacy work that you're doing, Ben, that it's really, really important. So today we want to change the narrative for property investing. 1.0, that's gone. The mum and dad property investor was 1.0, Ben. Property investing 2.0 is why property investors must think like small business owners. So, Ben, I think the first part of this is why bother? Why do we need to change the narrative anyway?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, Bryce. I did a little keynote speech last week in Melbourne. Shout out to all those people who turned up, and I used the narrative around that we're running our small businesses, and the feedback that I got from the group was, yeah, they'd never really thought about it like that. That it is a small business, but that's exactly what it is. I mean, ultimately, we're going to unpack what constitutes running that small business, but it just also said to them, well, wait a minute, I actually do employ someone, and I do operate in this way, and I've got bookkeeping, and I've got requirements, and I've got minimum standards, and I've got to make sure that I keep my customer happy, all of those little things that form part of that. And so, the way in which we're looking at the narrative and the politics, I think it's important before we sort of unpack this, Bryce, if I just sort of put a couple of things forward, and I think we always try to do this anyway, right, which is the people who are trying to change the narrative and trying to change the political agenda here, I think it's fair to say that they think that they're doing the right thing. Ultimately, they think it's coming from a place of trying to do good in terms of helping, whether it be people in tenancy or reducing the cost of housing to allow for people to be able to afford homes. So they think that they're doing a social good. So there's nothing wrong with that. I'll never judge people for the work that they're trying to do in terms of that. So they're well-meaning people. What the consequences of that are, you'll hear about more in this particular episode. I think that's an important reminder as well in terms of what we do. So one, recognizing that they're well-meaning people and they're trying to do that. But what we're also going to be talking about is if that narrative does go too far in one direction, there will be significant unintended consequences. And then when you start to think about those unintended consequences that impact all property owners, not just investors, and it impacts the economic viability of a society as well, maybe, just maybe, we need to make sure that we get that balance right.
Yeah, so when you said before that the people said, "Oh, I've never seen it like that," I think that's the problem, because we've got this thing that is an essential need, Ben. It's almost up there with air, right? To perform in this society, you need a stable roof over your head for optimal outcomes, right? And I think that is the biggest challenge, because if you think about, if we just go rattle off some small businesses, Ben, I've just written down a couple here. A car wash business, you could be an electrician, you could be fish and chips down the road, you could supply medical equipment to doctors, or you could supply medical equipment to hospitals, you could run a cafe, you could have one of those big trampoline centres, Ben, where the kids come in and they have the parties. Like these are all small businesses where someone is an operator in that small business, and they are trying to create a scenario where the revenue that they bring in is greater than the expenses that go out, so that they make a profit. And if they do that well enough, Ben, they might be able to buy a nice car. They might be able to buy a better than average house. They might be able to go on better than average holidays. And no one says, "Oh, you greedy fat cats." No, they go, "Wow, okay." They took on a commercial lease. Let's just go with the kids' trampoline centre, because I just went on the weekend with the kids. Took on a commercial lease, Ben. They have to have some staff in there to make sure everything's okay. They've got a cafe to run. They've got some people that walk around to make sure that their liabilities are okay. They have a bunch of insurance to make sure if anyone gets injured. They've obviously got to take the risk around fitting out the build. Like, there is a lot that's going on just in that small business alone. So I don't begrudge when they ask me to put over my card to tap to pay for the use of that facility. I'm not sitting there going, oh, you've got some amazing tax perks that afford you the ability to run a profit. No, I'm saying you've taken on an element of risk. You've put yourself in a risk scale that is over and above typically people who don't want to maybe just have a wage or a salary. And I get that, we can go into depths, but just in generally speaking, they've taken a lot of risk. And so we go, if you do that and it pays off and you get profit at the end of it, good on you. Well done. You're having a go. And I think that's really part of the challenge here. Whereas, even some of the political commentary that you get around property investors, they are the same. They are taking, and we're going to go through this in a sec, but they're taking risk and they're making measured steps to make sure the income and the expenses are in an optimal place in order for them to be able to afford it with the view of some long-term benefit. No different to the electrician, the fish and chip operator, the medical equipment supplier, the cafe. They've all got this capitalistic view in mind that if I am prepared to do this and put myself out there, hopefully there's payment down the track. And like a lot of small businesses, Ben, they often go into debt for their fit out. From day one, they might not be profitable. They might be in a situation where the first 2 or 3 or even 5 years they're not profitable. They've got a long range view on why they're actually doing it. And I guess if we have a house with a roof over our head that has a lot of emotional context to it, you can see why there's the bunch of narrative that you and I are trying to at the very least neutralize. But you get it. But it's no different to any of those examples we just rattled off, man.
No, it's not. And I think, Bryce, if I can build on that example and we all lift our minds and open those minds, lift our eyes, open our minds, what about the, hoteliers and sort of the big conglomerates of this world that run short-term rental accommodation business, which we call hotels and so there's brands all around the world and there's ownership from all other parts of the world, from Asia and the Americas and the UK and France. These own these big conglomerate short-term hotel rooms, and they're providing rental accommodation, just short-term. What we have in Australia, and in a sense, yes, they employ Australians, and it's an amazing story, but they still take their profits back to their offshore ports.
Motherland, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But here in Australia, like the same sort of thing, we're in the business of running, private rental accommodations, right? And so it really is important to understand that it's an essential need that we do. And yes, of course, we still do it for a profit. There's no doubt about that. Let's not try and, sort of sugarcoat it. It's still about providing for financial security for ourselves and our family, right? So we want to be people who are not in control of our financial freedom and our financial future. So it is a business that is about taking risks, and we want to get a risk-adjusted return for doing that that's commensurable to the business that we're running. And I think if we start thinking about that, rather than the guilt shaming that we see happening, which is part of that narrative that you were talking about, Bryce, in terms of that's the story that they're trying to tell. Greedy property investors owning 5, 6, 7 of these particular properties, locking us out of being able to afford property. We could make a very strong case, and I've made it prior to this before, is that the property market, in terms of the way in which the laws are set up, the tax laws in this country, actually prefer owner-occupiers. So the preferences in terms of the benefits from our current tax system benefits the owner-occupiers significantly more than any other type of residential property buyer. So that's an important reminder. They get, basically principal place of residence tax exemptions. They get pension exemptions from mean testing. They get the ability to do lump sum payments into super that are untaxed. And so we've always talked about on this pod that, remember, owner-occupiers drive the price. They drive the price, not the other way around. Like, investor should be a price taker, not a price maker. And the reason why the Great Australian Dream and buying property is so attractive is because there is an expectation that the value of that property will continue to grow. And that's all off the back of the way in which the mechanics of the economics work, because they're the rules of the game. And so don't lose sight of those things. And then when you have that sort of framing, you can then have more constructive dialogue rather than the guilt shaming that we're seeing at the moment to try and pivot the political agenda towards reform in this space, which has unintended consequences.
Now, the mum and dad narrative isn't working. There's no cut through on that, Ben. And the reason the mum and dad narrative happens is because it's largely, for a lot of property investors, based on stats, most people stop at one, Ben. So it becomes this passive investment scenario. And it's mum and dads who may or may not have any detailed level of business sophistication. I mean that with respect, Ben, but they're getting on with their life and they're just putting one, in our suggestion, one or two investment properties. It's just this passive set and forget structure, which leads to the mum and dad property investor. But that narrative's not working. That's actually not, it's not getting any cut through, because the reality of it is that the majority, if you unpack the details, the majority is actually that. It is actually people who are maybe work in the police force, or they're nurses, or they're teachers, or people who may not be exposed to extraordinary incomes, but they're doing incredible social good to our communities and our society. So they're going, okay, well, here's a way for me to do what I'm doing, focusing on my career, focusing on my family, and fit into that narrative of being the mum and dad property investor. But then when you get all the narratives that we're up against now, that's forgotten, because all of a sudden the mum and dad property investor is now the greedy fat cat. And that's the bit where you can't really distinguish between those. Well, it doesn't have any cut through to distinguish. On one hand, we're saying over here, but on the other hand, you're seeing them as people just with a bunch of cash with extraordinary excess and extraordinary rules working against them. The majority of property investors, Ben, are at the very best just breaking even for a long period of time. And for as we talked a lot on this podcast, they're usually in a negative cash flow position until they move to that point. So that narrative just doesn't have the cut through, Ben, which is why we want to change it.
Yeah, so let's talk about why investing is like a small business, or acting like a small business. Now, the important part of this is we do have hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in the asset. Now, the asset can't just sit there and do nothing. It ultimately needs to attract a customer, which is a tenant, the renter, and it also needs to be managed. Now, in terms of managing that investment, we highly recommend you use a property manager. So effectively, we've got an employee who's working as part of our small business that we're running. In addition to that, we're also employing other trades. So we have regular minimum standards compliance work that needs to be done, from checking gas and certainly checking sort of smart meters and certainly, sort of fire, sort of smoke detectors, those types of things. So there is a little ecosystem of businesses and repairs and trades that we are supporting as part of running that small business. So we are definitely outsourcing some of that sort of day-to-day work, because, they know the rules and the regulations, and they obviously help with selection of the customer that we're going to work with. But that's a good start in terms of trying to understand that story. And ultimately, part of also running that small business is then looking at things like, how do I add value to that business? How do I, make that business the most attractive to satisfy my customer? And I might have, many customers over the decades that I hold that property, because we want tenants to have safe and quiet enjoyment. Like, we want our tenants to be happy tenants as part of that. Now, there'll always be outliers in terms of, there will be people who think that ownership gives them the ultimate rights in terms of how they can treat their customers. That shouldn't be the case. And I can understand why we've got to make sure that isn't the case. But we also need to have confidence for that investor, that small business owner, remembering that there's 2.3 million of us out there, that if we don't have confidence in, the rules staying as the game was intended to stay, then ultimately that's going to put at risk some of that future investment.
All right, let's do some side by side, Ben. If we've got the mum and dad narrative on the left and we want to drag them to the right so they own to small business, let's have a look at some of the similarities here for small business, so we can plead the case that it is a small business. So number one, if you've got a small business, a traditional small business, you've got a manage those assets. So you might be thinking about assessing the value and the performance of inventory or the equipment or the intellectual property that you have in your business. So how does that relate to investors? Well, they got to assess property value. They got to determine their rental income and some depreciation. So it begs the question, why does that matter? Well, viewing your properties as business assets encourages those data-driven decisions. When do I reno? When do I adjust my rent? In some cases, do I need to divest? Or in other cases, do I need to add to the portfolio? So the same thing applies to small business owners in terms of managing those assets, Ben. So
condition, your maintenance and repairs ongoing, sort of. So you talk about inventory. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're running a manufacturing business, you've got to look at the wear and tear on your plant and equipment. So that's another great example of what you're just talking about there, Bryce.
So managing assets like a business too is income generation. So a small business, Ben, they carefully manage their cash flow to have revenue be greater than expenses to turn a profit and remain solvent. In some cases, they don't have to turn a profit to remain solvent as long as they've got liquidity and cash flow. But that is, you always use the example of BHP wouldn't go and start a mine without having a significant business plan. But the fish and chip shop's doing the similar thing, Ben, in terms of how many bags of chips do I need, bags of potatoes do I need to order? Where do I get my fresh produce from so that I'm offering the freshest fish for my customers? Can I get it refrigerated in a way that I can actually get it from the ocean to their mouths in the shortest period of time? There's a bunch of stuff that in terms of, I don't want to have too much stock, but I've got to have enough to make sure that when everyone turns up on a Sunday on a hot day and it hasn't been hot for the last 3 weeks, I've got to make sure I've got enough fish that means that I can satisfy the demand. So there's a lot of cash flow that goes into it. There's a lot of modeling that goes into it to make sure that they've got the right amount of stock based on the delivery costs, the storage costs, the cost to hold the capital. So your fish and chip shop's doing the same thing, Ben. The best ones have got a spreadsheet and they're managing this in a way that includes all their staff. So income generation is really, really important for the small business owner. It's the same for investors, Ben.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if I think about one of the things I'm looking for is what is the demand like for rental in that area? Like how easy it is going to attract the type of rental customer that I'm looking for. So, and what can they afford to pay? What's my minimum break even in terms of making sure that I've got that regular income coming in? I don't want to have the property vacant for reasonable periods of time because that's going to impact my income generation on that property. So it absolutely is why you got to think about it like a small business.
Yeah, and I guess the cash flow management is crucial to avoid any strain in both scenarios. So again, another case while we're bringing mum and dad investing over to small business owners, and buffers need to be put in place in both cases. Whether you're the guy that does the trampoline business, the cafe, the car wash business, you're needing buffers, which is the same. So that income generation is the same whether you're a property investor or a small business owner. It leads on to the next one, Ben, around strategic planning. So again, if you're a small business, if you're not growing, you're dying, right? So the idea is you're trying to look for efficiencies to scale your operations, or you might be looking to open up a new market, or you might be introducing a new product to your existing customers in order to grow the amount of revenue that you can get per customer. So there's a bunch of things that you'll be doing strategically in small business. Again, if you've got the trampoline business on the weekend, Ben, how do they add more products to their existing offering to maximize the amount of people that turn up? Because they might want to sell them, prime drinks, or they might want to sell them sausage rolls, or they might want to give them an extra experience over and above what you pay for standard that people can pay, which is a little bit more exclusive for them to get a little bit more revenue. So these are the things that they're thinking of strategically. But investors have got to be strategic too, Ben. When do I add more property? Do I diversify the portfolio? And what about the types of property and the ages and established versus new? There's a bunch of strategic planning that goes into that as well.
Huge amount. So I really like what you talked about in terms of diversification, looking at risk profiles around where is that money going to be allocated. So I don't want it all caught up in land tax. So I want to spread that in terms of being a borderless investor. I want to, as part of my strategic planning and have a plan, is when does my property turn from, say, negatively geared or neutrally geared to positively geared? Like at the end of the day, part of that modelling and that long-term projections, I want to know, when does this property start delivering me positive cash flow? Because if I'm after $2,000 or $2,500 a week in passive income, that's all part of that modelling and strategic planning that you're doing. So in other words, rather than just jumping in, it's being, strategic about that approach. So effectively the pathway that you're on and the roadmap. Now, there'll always be sometimes, roundabouts or detours or a few things in there. But if you don't have that plan, then ultimately it's all guesswork, and you run the risk from a property investor and running a business. If you don't plan inventory, if you don't plan repair, maintenance, and all of those things get broken, you lose productivity. Yeah. And that's no different than, thinking about your small business, which is your private rental accommodation business. You've got to be thinking about those types of things. If the property gets too dilapidated and run down, is that going to attract the right type of tenant that I want, when this potential tenant decides to move on? Whatever that sort of looks like, you've got to be thinking about that strategically.
Buying local versus interstate, Ben. Should I renovate to add a fourth bedroom? Should I consider going into the short-term pool versus being in the long-term pool? These are all strategic decisions that a property investor makes, which is just not dissimilar to strategic decisions that traditional small business owners make. Next one is risk management and contingency planning. So within the small business environment, Ben, traditional, you would have contingency plans for supply chain disruptions. What happens to your customers if you've promised something to them and there's delay? Or what happens if, for some reason that's not explained, that you have the changes in demand? Or, like our friend Brad Beer experienced in his small business, which it's more medium business now for Brad, but at a pen stroke on May the 17th, I think in 2017, his business was changed forever. Until they change it again, Ben. So, but there's a bunch of risk management that happens for the traditional business owner that is not too dissimilar for investors.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if I was doing one of those tanning salons, they're now illegal. Like, and if I was running a tobacco shop, there's now challenges. These are the extreme ideas. But if you're thinking about going into business, you want to be thinking, and certainly in property investment and, private rental accommodation business, the demand for private rental accommodation should really never slow down unless the city or the town is actually going backwards, right? And people are leaving it. So ultimately, if you've got a strong economy, then that's going to be attracting new people. And before they, buy for the long term themselves, they are potentially going to be renting as part of that story. So you want to be thinking about that regulatory risk in terms of, the rules being changed too much. And then ultimately, what does that mean for you in terms of being in that small business? And that to me still remains the biggest risk. And that's why we're talking about changing the narrative, because we want the politicians to understand that if the risk-adjusted return isn't appropriate, we're just not going to invest in your city or town, and we're going to put our tens of billions of dollars elsewhere.
Yeah, investors are managing risk around market downturns, tenant, vacancies, unexpected maintenance costs that come up, all those sorts of things. So, but they have what's called an emergency fund, Ben. We call it a buffer, which can help with some of those things. Hey, the next one is understanding and managing liabilities. So as a small business owner, they've got to understand their liabilities, including the debts, contractual obligations, and potential legal risks. So again, if you go back to the trampoline centre, they may owe money for the fit out. They've got some obligations to, in some cases, people that come in and form, maybe there's a cafe operator that operates that part of the business. And as I alluded to before, it could be a highly litigious environment when you have young kids running around. And if there's something that they cut themselves on, or if there's something that negligent in the way that the stuff was set up, is important. So they've got to be constantly thinking about this stuff to make sure that they manage that. And with investors, same deal. Financial liabilities, so they've got to manage the debt. They've got legal obligations and complying with tenancy laws and building regs. So there's a bunch of stuff that property investors have got to do, which doesn't mean that they're totally passive. They've got to be on. If they hire the right people, they can mitigate some of those things. But again, Ben, to this point, there's no difference between property investors and small business owners have to do that.
no different, Bryce. I'll give you a real life example. When Jane and I moved back to Melbourne after our period of a decade out of Melbourne, and we moved into our property in Flemington, we bought a gas heater with us, a portable gas heater that basically would connect in, and it was, running beautifully, and we enjoyed warmer, nights with this gas heater in the lounge room. And then when we turned it into an investment property, that gas heater was not compliant in Victoria compared to New South Wales. So I could use it in New South Wales. But the moment I found out it was not compliant, I was running the risk of having the tenants, harm being caused through some gas leak or whatever that might be. And so ultimately those types of heaters are now banned. And so I had to basically get rid of that heater and put another heating solution into that property to keep my tenant happy. So just another example of making sure that you're aware of what the minimum standards are and what safe and quiet enjoyment of the property means.
Well, to your point, Ben, Victorians are very clear on what minimum standards are in this particular state, so they've got to manage that. But just in terms of managing liabilities, just think about what investors do. We use this language all the time, but it is still managing a liability. Can I improve my structure? Can I reduce the amount of interest that I'm paying? In fact, can I leverage and go again? These are all conversations that you're having as a property investor. So again, bridging that narrative between mum and dad investor and small business owner. The next one is customer relationship management, Ben. So for the small business owner, what are they trying to do? Customer satisfaction, client retention, and build a positive reputation. So if you think about, the cafe owner, they are forever trying to bring more people in. Once they get there, trying to satisfy them and say, we often the best baristed coffees, or we have actually the best alternate milks, or we have the best alternate hot drinks, or for me, Ben, I will drive past 100 cafes to go to the one specifically that deals with celiacs like me. So, but they're trying to retain customers. They're trying to build a positive reputation so that they come back again, and they dine out on. They live and die by that. And if they provide a poor experience for their customers, they will be forever chasing new ones, because it's easier to keep a customer than it is to find a new one.
I mean, like, if we're in the business of providing private rental accommodation, we want our customers to be happy. We want them to stay as long as possible. Now, bearing in mind, if we have really great customers and they look after the property, then we tend to also recognize that as we do our reviews. Now, in some cases, to the points about risk mitigation, when interest rates and our costs go higher, we've got to make difficult decisions about how much of those costs we can pass on. Because if you've got a great tenant who's, just enjoying the property and isn't a burden, or isn't, creating a lot of noise and anxieties and challenges and extra work, then you want to reward that client. I mean, absolutely, that customer is so important to you. And so if you can, maybe shave $10 a week off, or, if the market's moved to $40 a week in increased rents and you only do 30, you're actually doing them a favor. It doesn't feel like a favor sometimes, but if they sort of understand the context of where you're coming from, and you can have some of that dialogue through your property manager, that builds relationships, it builds trust. And so, at the end of the day, this, symbiotic relationship needs to be a good one, because if it's a jarring one, then ultimately the experience for both parties is frustrating. It ends up in mediation, or, worse still, sort of conflict. And that's not where you want to be. You don't want to have your customer in conflict if you can avoid it.
Yeah, and customer relationship management brings in before some of the things you talked about, strategic planning and even managing your liabilities, right? Because your point, the whole goal for a property investor is to have a tenant that loves the place, treats it well, and minimise the amount of turnover. But in some cases, a lot of people find themselves in a position, Ben, as a result of wanting to keep that tenant that treats the place like their own, they aren't competitive to market rent, right? Which is fine. And some people are in a position where they don't have to do that. But that flows back to strategic planning. Okay, I'm getting $30 less per week than what the market is prepared to pay. So therefore, I have to go and actually have a look at my liabilities, see what the interest I'm paying is, what are my expenses. Ben, they do this on MOORR, of course, MOORR, but they've worked this out very quickly. And then they might go, actually, the strategic decision I'm going to make here is I'm actually going to reward this tenant by keeping them there, because I'm in a position where I actually don't need that extra $30 right now. I might adjust it in the future as part of my passive income goal, but I'm playing the game of wanting to find the optimum result of that tenant is actually working really well for me, and at this point in time, I don't need that extra $30. So that's all part of what you do as a property investor. It's not always just let's maximize it. And small business owners doing that all the time, Ben. They're making judgment calls on existing customers. They might give them a deal, a discount that happens when they continually show up every Thursday. They come and get their favorite, apple pie and coffee in this particular cafe, or they always bring their kids to this place, or they always get the Sparky to come out and do this all the time. They're making those decisions all the time around customer relationship management, and that's what property investors are doing too.
Yeah, and Bryce, the one that I want to talk to now is you've got an employee in a way, right? You've contracted out the property manager, so you've got to manage employment relationships. So is the property manager managing the property and keeping you informed and doing all the things that they said that they would do as part of that agreement? Because you've employed them to do that work, and you're paying them a percentage of the income to allow that work to be facilitated. And so you've got, in some cases, you've got good employees and bad employees. And so if your employee starts off really great, but then starts to wander a bit and then, or distracted, or potentially, ultimately you're not feeling like you're getting the same attention that you used to get, then you've got to also have that sort of employee-employer conversation about, making sure that they're still the right person to do the work that you've asked them to do as part of managing the asset and obviously keeping the tenants happy in that property. So that in itself is a really important thing. As a small business owner, you've got to understand that employment arrangement via contract also allows you to it's a difficult part, but it's part and parcel of running a small business.
And again, it comes back to strategic decisions, Ben, because as a small business owner, you've got a choice to actually go and get employees or build a team of people, or you can do it yourself. And what do you sacrifice when you do it yourself in terms of growth and having more time to focus on the business? Well, that's exactly the point that you just made. A lot of people, a lot of property investors have the decision on whether they're going to self-manage or go out to property managers. And again, they just got to make a decision not too dissimilar to a small business owner. Should I do it all myself and save the cost, or do I see a bigger picture here by employing other people, building a bigger team, and being able to create a bigger pie as well? So very good points. Last one we want to talk about here, and just drawing a side-by-side comparison, Ben, is just marketing and branding, right? So the small business owner has to find engaged leads. They have to find ways to attract attention to whatever problem it is that they're solving, whether it's a good, whether it's a service, whatever it is that business is providing. They're going to have to find ways to pattern interrupt, get people's interest, find reasons why they should come to their small business. And once they've done it through their branding, find ways to retain those customers. So the property investor is doing similar stuff, Ben. Notwithstanding what you just talked about in terms of that employee relationship with the property manager, but if you extend that further, there's agency on behalf of the property investor that the good property manager will do for them. Professional photography, really good professional copy for property descriptions, making sure they're listed on the most popular platforms. Like, there's just a ton of stuff. We've got this, you can't sell a secret. You've got this property, and if it's available, you've got to invest in engaging in attracted leads who are interested in taking up what you've got to offer.
And like with all branding and marketing, who is my target audience? And to your point of how do I attract the best of that target audience? How do I make sure that my product and my brand and my delivery of that overall experience is what I said it would be as part of that branding and marketing that you're doing? And listening to some of the feedback from your tenants in terms of, hey, what would be really nice if I could have air conditioning in here because it just makes the summer months a little bit more bearable or whatever. So that's all part of satisfying that customer and then building the right product in the right marketplace to attract, the better tenants that high quality tenant that really do, have pride in the way in which they present their home as part of that arrangement.
So, folks, we didn't provide an exhaustive list, but the idea was to just go, okay, mum and dad property investor narrative. How do we bring that narrative over to small business owners? So we talked about how managing assets like a business. We've got to look into income generation, strategic planning, risk management and contingency planning, understanding and managing liabilities. We talked about customer relationship management. Ben talked about the relationship around employing different people, and then we just finished it off there with marketing branding. So, Ben, that is by no means an exhaustive list of the comparisons, but ultimately it just goes to show that despite, I think the idea is if you see yourself as a small business owner, and to the point that you said before, Ben, when you did that talk last week, when someone goes, I've never really seen it like that. That is the goal of today, to get you to see it like that, because that's exactly it is. But it kind of then goes, all right, so we've talked about why we want to change the narrative. We've just given some examples, not exhaustive, of why we think that there's no difference between property investors and traditional definition of small business owner. But it'd be nice to go through here on what is actually shifting this narrative achieve.
Yeah, well, I think the big part is, basically at the end of the day, politicians want two things. They want to make a difference as part of the public service work that they do. That's their sort of underlying agenda, but they also want to stay in power, because if they're not in power, they don't get the chance to obviously implement, the changes or the value sets that they believe that the nation or the state or whatever should be moving forward with. So unfortunately, that does create this populist politics that's going on. And so that's why, again, we're coming back to this story of them talking about greedy property investors and then making property really expensive for people to be able to afford. The narrative from our point of view is that every city, town, growing city, country needs rental accommodation. And not everyone can afford to go into hotels and motels and pay the premium for that short-term accommodation. So they'll need to go in that. And people make choices. There's not, yes, there are people who by circumstance do require accommodation, and they may not have the capacity to do that. That's why there's public and social housing. But there's a lot of people by choice who are looking to have new experiences, move to new cities, build new friendships and networks as part of their journey in life. And, there's also people who are renovating who need, sort of 6 months or 12 months while their home's being rebuilt. So there's just a lot of reasons why people choose to rent. And that's by choice, not necessarily by necessity. So part of that story is when, this is being debated at dinner parties or, at the pub having a drink or whatever that looks like, that people understand that actually they are small businesses and actually they do inject tens of billions of dollars into the economy. In fact, I think I've mentioned this several times on the pod over, the many years that we've been running it. But a NAB economist once said for $1 that goes into property, residential property, that is, $10 is created in terms of economic benefit through the subsequent tradies and builders and all of those sort of pieces. And also remembering in some states, it's upwards of 40% to 53% of all taxes are, that the state governments and the federal governments get are priced into that. So ultimately, they also paying their way in terms of the taxes and charges that they're already paying. So what we're trying to do in Shift the Narrative is really just around sort of saying, rather than us being the problem, what you've got to be thinking about is if investors keep investing, that creates that additional supply. So make us part of the solution and make sure you give us confidence to want to be part of that solution, rather than the lack of confidence that we might get through, the risk of policy changes, which really disrupt our ability to make a return on investment. And ultimately, we're going to find ourselves in a far more severe position that we currently already find ourselves in, this current housing crisis that we've got.
Yeah, so we're talking about public perceptions there, right? So if we shift the narrative, we change the public perceptions. To your point, if we can change it from being the problem to the solution, but if you can do that, then you'll encourage market participation, right? You'll bring more investors back into the market, which grows the pie. And look, to be honest, if you want to grow your economy, you want to put it at the hands of the entrepreneurs. It's people who are looking to add value, find problems, solve those problems, and in the process, creating a bigger pie along the way. That's a good thing. So one, it's changed public perceptions. Two, if you shift the narrative, you then get to have more of an influence on policy decisions. So if you can incentivize long-term value-adding investment. So we're on record as not supporting people who want to be short-term speculators. We're on record of saying that we don't want people to have 12, 15, 100 properties. It's largely allowing people to get a handful, 1, 2, or 3 investment properties in terms of what our formula is. By being able to do that, we can then incentivize those people to come into the market and add value as long-term investors. And then thirdly, you get to have industry council and collaboration. Because what's interesting is if you have career public servants who are doing a wonderful job, but they've never actually been in the arena of taking on risk, Ben, trying to solve problems in the marketplace, all of the things we talked around, strategic planning and income generation, how do we market and how do we manage the risk? And if they haven't actually done and experienced those things, it makes it very difficult for them to understand what the unintended consequences are of some of their policy decisions that they make. So Ben, if we can change that narrative to small business owners and then have the government see representatives as small business owners rather than greedy fat cats trying to take away the rental properties and all those sorts of things, that will encourage the government to seek industry counsel rather than the current situation where they are excluded, the people who are actually at the coalface, who know what some of these unintended consequences are, and then they can add valuable solutions. Because again, if they were to seek our counsel, we wouldn't be saying to them, let loose and let property investors run wild. We're actually saying no. As property investors get more and more properties in their portfolio, well, then the additional benefits that are afforded to them will start to diminish. But we're certainly saying those who are trying to get into the game and get self-funded. So we're trying to provide some, to the extent that we are biased, Ben, because we are property investors, but we're trying to provide counsel that seems fair for everyone, given that some people want to be property investors, some people don't, and there's a bunch of sort of options on the spectrum in between, including some of the things you said before about how people just want to experience the fullness of life that doesn't come with anchoring into one particular mortgage or one piece of land.
Yeah, so again, we're now moving into the political sphere because obviously that sets the laws, which is the rules of, the game and how society works and how money moves around the society and who gets what. And so, you see a lot of socialist ideas and all of that coming through people who are coming through university, well-meaning ideas at the time. I mean, but to your point, they don't have that lived experience. And so, and then they get into, a capitalist environment where, the level of income that they earn is based on the value that they provide for the business, et cetera, et cetera. And then ultimately, then they want to provide for their family and then they work really hard. And then there's a judgment call in terms of how much of that money that they're working really hard for gets shared across the community. And we know just through history that socialism has never delivered on its promise. And unfortunately, it never will deliver on its promise. And so what we're trying to do is sort of, whilst, that's political, gunpowder for the likes of the Greens and the left-leaning sort of, Labor side of politics, it's really important to understand that these unintended consequences that come off the back of that, like ultimately, if you're not growing the economy and if we're not getting investment into the economy, then effectively the economy shrinks. And that means there's only two ways to pay for all the things that socialists' idealism wants, which is, shelter, medicines, educations. Well, they've got to be paid somehow. So if you're not collecting or growing the pie and growing the amount of taxes that you're collecting, then ultimately you can only do it through higher taxes or you can do it through higher debt levels. And both of those are very dangerous. And that's why when you do see these socialist experiments, eventually the government collapses in on itself because the citizens and people just realize they're working for nothing. And also the country goes broke and it's very hard to get out of those particular cycles, which again, if you want a great study on this, just study Argentina for the last 120 years, sort of going through that cycle. And that's the danger of popular politics and that populism that we're also starting to see come through in our political leaders, including, for that matter, the current Liberal leader in terms of Dutton. I don't like his politics. I don't like the divisive populism that he's doing. So he's not someone that I would respect in terms of being able to make that change. And so that's my apolitical view on that. I've said that, I'm a swinging voter, and so I'm not going to vote for Peter Dutton in the next election if he continues this divisive political position, because it doesn't serve anyone very well. And it's popular politics. What I want is someone who can run an economy, grow the economy, and continue to keep reinvesting, that sort of thing. And that's the economic benefit that Bryce was talking about in terms of how that flows through.
So what have we got in terms of economic benefits, Ben? So we've just talked about changing public perceptions, what that does. 2, influence on policy decisions, which is the politics. And 3, what are the economic benefits of changing the narrative? Well, if we can stabilise the rental market by offering more stock and more options, based on the fact that if we're considered the solution, not the problem, more people come into the market, that is the solution for the tenants that is going on now. And what's happening now is property investors are leaving the market, which is making it worse. Yeah. So number 1, we get to stabilise the rental market if we get back to status quo. 2, we've talked about this a little bit through the pod, Ben, but to a bullet point here, job creation, there is a multiplier effect. You said $1 creates 10. Well, that is true. One property investor is employing a property manager who might employ a Sparky, who might employ a maintenance person, who might employ a leasing consultant. There's just a ton of multiplier effect that comes through being property investors. So there is some economic benefits from small business owners. The benefits of being small business owners then helps grow the pie. And then thirdly, here is an entrepreneurial mindset, Ben. So we want to develop Australia's culture as thought leaders globally. We need to instill the entrepreneurial mindset. It's not for everyone, but the ideas come from the ambition that comes from being in a capitalistic society, Ben. So there are pros and cons of being a capitalist, but generally the highest living standards around the world are capitalist economies, largely because it gives an incentive for those who want to go out and make stuff happen. But for those people who do want to make stuff happen, if they've got the right intent, Ben, they bring a lot of people along for the ride through every part of the multiplier that is created. So I think that you do want to nurture entrepreneurial mindset. I remember flying over to the States, Ben, and being in the room with some of the best businesses in the world were in that room, Ben. And I remember the person leading that event getting up and just saying, hey, look, all change is affected in this room. Now, that was not to say that it doesn't happen outside the room, but the sentiment was largely entrepreneurs are the people that are going to actually make positive change and make things happen. And that's where it happens, not in government. It happens in the hands of those entrepreneurs. So I think if we can create an entrepreneurial mindset, and small business owners are by nature generally entrepreneurial in mindset anyway, Ben, that is only a good thing for our economy.
It is so important what you just said there, Bryce, and it comes back to what we were saying. An entrepreneurial mindset means I'm going to invest my human capital, my time, and potentially my money, and also potentially some of my investment money, so some of the debt that I'll take on as part of the calculated risk that I take. And if I do that, and as property investors, that's tens of billions of dollars every year that's flowing into the economy and growing the economy and giving people jobs, those jobs that obviously then create their lifestyle and their living standards and gives them the opportunity to also, create their lifestyle by design. And then that flows into, the conclusions that we talk about here. If we've got the right incentives, then the tenant wins because there'll be more properties available in the market. That will allow also for rents to be more stabilised, and we won't have these, sort of big run-ups when the cost of money continues to go high. Because even if interest rates did go up really high, but there was a higher supply, then ultimately the business owner is in a really hard place. They won't be able to increase their cost or pass their costs on to their customer. So that's also an important move. So the tenant wins in that particular case in terms of satisfying that need. And if they've got safe and quiet enjoyment because the property owner is actually providing, a good asset that they can have that safe and quiet enjoyment, that's a big winner for them. In terms of the government, this is about the narrow-mindedness of the government. If those tens of billions of dollars don't get invested, then who invests it? Because the political problem is not going to go away. So you're talking about over the last 3 decades, the amount of public and social housing that government has built has dropped dramatically to be less than 3% of the total property market. And so ultimately that is not just tens of billions, that would be constitute, significant investment. Well, where does that money come from? It's only going to come from higher taxes or debt. And we know the problems with higher taxes and debt. It actually slows that economic flywheel. So it's really important that the government needs to be thinking about in terms of reversing that mindset. And so that's the unintended consequences of trying to put out a political fire now, because this narrative around greedy mum and dad property investors or boomers enjoying the spoils of their life and all the next generations having trouble coming through, that's not the mindset we want to create here. It's back to that winner's mindset, that aspirational mindset, that entrepreneurial spirit. That is, it's basically how this country has been built into the wealthy country that it is today. Yes, we've also had some luxuries of lots of, great minerals in the ground, which does a lot of that heavy lifting for us as well. So it's really important to understand that. And off the back of that, if we've got this economic flywheel and economic engine growing, cities growing because they've got rental accommodation there, which means we can move that human capital, society wins, doesn't it, Bryce?
It does, because it's a more stable housing market reduces homelessness and housing stress and healthier, more vibrant communities, right? But that entrepreneurial spirit drives innovation and economic growth, and so it makes our society more resilient and prepared to meet those future challenges. And we were chatting about this before, but necessity is the mother of invention. So when you let the general forces of market demand run its own course, people then have to move in their seat to get more comfortable, and they find more effective building structures or more cost-effective building standards, and it gets better overall for society. And I guess finally the investor wins, right, Ben? And we put them last for a reason, but ultimately at the end of the day, they're trying to self-fund retirement. For some people who are forming essential needs and social work, they have a side business, Ben, to the point of this whole podcast. They can run a side hustle, side business that will ultimately supplement them in the future so that they can better support their families, have that sense of achievement fulfilled. But ultimately, Ben, not have to rely on the government to provide them with a pension. The pension is not an aspiration, Ben. The pension is a safety net. If you're a trapeze artist,
well said.
If you're a trapeze artist in the circus, there is a safety net underneath, just in case the hours of practice that you've done, for whatever reason, you do the flip and the next person goes to grab you and they, for whatever reason, Ben, the timing is out and they slip. The safety net is there just to make sure that they don't break their neck. But they do not want to land in the safety net. That is the same way that we've got to see the pension. It is a safety net. It's not an aspiration. So therefore, the investor definitely wins. Society wins. We think the government wins because they'll collect more taxes, Ben. They'll underpin the housing market at the ballot box. Less money that goes out for out of the coffers. But ultimately, Ben, if we go back to the original narrative that starts all this in the first place with all of the groups, the tenant actually wins, Ben. And that's the bit that we don't want to be lost, because if there's more choice and we promote better standards for property investors, that stability in the market for the people who want to be renters, for those who are in positions where they have to be renters, hopefully we've shown you that the small business wants to look after their customer. So the investor wants to look after their customer, which is the tenant. So ultimately, Ben, if we get this narrative right and we change it from mum and dad investor to small business owner, ultimately the tenant does win.
They win, Bryce. And again, if you grow the economic pie rather than changing or increasing taxes or minimum compliance standards, which is cost, which ultimately gets passed on the tenant. If you actually increase the volume, which is more supply, the government, back to your point, gets those higher tax receipts. And guess what they could do with those higher tax receipts? They could provide increased levels of social and public housing so they can have that safety net for those most vulnerable in the community. If that other bit doesn't happen and they still have to provide that safety net, we go broke. And ultimately, everyone starts paying higher taxes. And ultimately, that economic flywheel of wealth creation and that repurpose and that spending of that wealth back into the economy increases our overall living standards and allows us to provide the education, health, and all of the services that we are so lucky to have in this country. But if you tax everyone too high, you'll see everyone trying to dodge those taxes, trying to move their money offshore, do all of these other silly things when we need all of that money to stay put here to look after those. So I think, when someone talks to you about the property market and certainly private rental accommodation, and if you're running that business, say I'm a small business owner is the message here, because that's exactly what you are.
So there you go, folks. Have we changed your narrative over the last hour? Are you seeing yourself as a small business owner instead of the mum and dad investor? And if that's the case, tick for us, Ben. But ultimately, we'd love you to help us with this work. See yourself first as the small business owner, but then in all the narratives that you have with your colleagues, your friends, your workers, talk about you as a small business owner, and hopefully, ultimately, we'll affect some change here, Ben. So, yeah, let us know on socials what you think of that. Hey, Ben, my life hack today is, it's kind of like, how did it take me so long to work this out? But I had in the hallway, I had to put some prints up, right? And so just imagine on the back of the print, there's it could be a rope, it could be a wire, whatever. And so what you're typically doing is you're putting your hook on the wall. And what are we doing, Ben? We're usually getting as close to the wall as we possibly can, and then we have a couple of goes and then try and get up. Well, what I'd suggest you do, Ben, and I Googled this and then I started doing it, works. Instead of doing that, just grab a fork, just a standard fork, and slip it on the hook, Ben, right? So it slips onto the hook so that it comes, so the end of the fork comes out towards you.
Yeah.
And then all you do is you slip the rope over the fork, slide it down the back, and then lift the fork out, and she's in.
Ooh, it's nice. It's a good one. There are some of those ones where you just can't get your finger in there, right? Can you? It's like, trying to get that bit of rope, you're trying to get over the hook.
Well, this one you can just walk up, put the rope over the fork, then step away, slide it down, and then just pull the fork out.
Clever.
There we go.
Clever. I like it.
Hey, Ben, what's making property news?
Yeah, so I thought I'd just, off the back of some really nice feedback we had on our mid-year market update, I thought I'd just bit of data that's come through from our friends at the Housing Industry Association. And hopefully we'll get them on soon as well. They've just released some data that we want to talk to as well. But we did see they track a pretty good job at tracking new home sales. So what we did see in their year-on-year report, that home sales are up 11% in the last 3 months to July compared to the previous year. Now, remember, that's coming off a pretty low base, so it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of movement out there. But this is also about sort of starting to see that economic flywheel moving. So what we did see in terms of where is that increase coming from, Queensland is leading that growth story with new home sales surging 15.6% in July compared to the previous month. The state overall sales in the past 3 months are 60% up on where they were last year. Now, remember, last year was interest rates going and, all sorts of difficult elements in terms of the higher cost. But that's an indication of people just getting on with their lives, okay? They're still feeling pretty happy about their job security, so they're starting to invest into, a next home for them. South Australia is also very strong. Sales up 55.8% in the 3 months to July. Western Australian home sales are also remain elevated, but they are starting to slow off just a little bit. And then you've got New South Wales and Victoria. So New South Wales numbers are up over the last 3 months. We're seeing sort of 17.5%, so not as strong, but the Victorian experience is actually on further decline. So we're talking about 13.3% in decline. So I think we've made our point clear about how you stuff up a housing market. You just follow the Victorian state government's implementations of their silly policies, and this is the unintended consequences you get. So I don't need to sort of harp on with that, but that just sort of gives you a bit of an idea in terms of what's happening more broadly across the new home sales market, and that has been an area that has been struggling with higher costs, affordability, availability of builders, some builders going broke, all of that sort of is playing out. So there are some green shoots in that market, and that bodes well for obviously a bit of increased supply. But again, if you don't get those settings right, those incentive settings and those business settings, and you charge too much tax, you don't get that investment, which is pretty much what we've been talking about as well. in running our small businesses and where we put those investment dollars.
Well said, mate. So do we now officially change the title of our book, Ben, The Armchair Guide to Small Business Ownership, How to Retire on 2,000 a week?
Yeah, maybe.
Probably doesn't get the same...
No, it's a bit of a long title, isn't it? Yeah,
Doesn't get the same
maybe
hook,
not.
does it? But essentially, that's what we're doing. So we'll go and talk to our publisher. She'll probably tell us that, nope, we'll stick to property investing. But hey, folks, let us know if that's actually been helpful for you today. We'd certainly love to think that was help you frame up the discussion that you're having with yourself, with your partner, with your friends and your colleagues to hopefully get property investing 2.0, Ben. Why property investors must think like small business owners. Until next week, Ben.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Only if you act. See you next week, folks.